The air in the living room is thick, silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the frantic, ragged beat of my own heart. My fingers, stained with dried ink from going over the numbers for the 10th time, trace the line item again. A department store. Not our usual. Not even close. A boutique, really. The kind with hushed voices and velvet ropes for changing rooms. The charge is astronomical. More than we spent on our last vacation. More than the emergency fund we've been building for years. And the date. The date is etched into my memory already, a scar forming behind my eyes. It's the weekend, he said. He was at a conference upstate. A conference that apparently involved dropping 5 figures on what? The statement doesn't say. Just a transaction number, and the name of a place that sells things I only ever admired through plate glass windows, items priced like small cars. A cold dread, heavier than any physical weight, settles in my gut, spreading through my limbs, making them feel strangely numb and distant. My breath catches, a painful knot forming in my chest. I blink, forcing my eyes to focus, hoping the numbers will rearrange themselves into something logical, something explainable. They don't. They just stare back, stark black ink on white paper, screaming a truth I'm not ready to hear. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We built a life together, brick by careful brick. 19 years. It wasn't a fairy tale, not ever. There were arguments, of course, quiet disagreements over finances, or loud ones about whose turn it was to clean the garage. But there was a foundation. I thought there was. We had routines, shared jokes that nobody else understood, a rhythm to our days and nights that felt comfortable, safe. He worked long hours. I managed the home, built a small online business that gave me just enough independence to feel like I wasn't completely reliant, but not enough to truly stand alone. We had plans. Retirement funds slowly growing, discussions about maybe downsizing in a few years, traveling more. The house, filled with furniture we picked out together, photographs aging on the walls, felt like an extension of us. His shirts in the closet, the scent of his cologne lingering in the bathroom, the way he always left his socks by the bed. These were the small, irritating, comforting details of my normal. My world was small, perhaps, but it felt solid. Grounded. I trusted him implicitly. He was my husband, my partner, my future. The very idea of deception felt alien. Impossible within the confines of the life we had built, or so I believed. I remember looking across the dinner table at him, watching him talk about his day, the familiar lines around his eyes when he smiled, and feeling a quiet sense of contentment. This was it. This was us. Simple. Predictable. Safe. The thought that this stability was built on a fragile, hidden lie was so far beyond my comprehension, it wasn't even a concept my mind could grasp. It was like trying to imagine a color you've never seen. The arrival of the credit card statement wasn't dramatic in itself. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between junk mail and a utility bill. I remember walking it to the kitchen counter, dropping it onto the stack of papers that needed sorting. Another bill. Another reminder of the mundane reality of maintaining a household. It sat there for a day, maybe 2, just another envelope in the landscape of our lives. I picked it up eventually, probably while making coffee, the usual morning ritual playing out around me, the gurgle of the machine, the clink of the mug, the soft light filtering through the window. My eyes scanned the summary page, the total balance, the minimum payment due. Normal. Then, my gaze dropped to the transactions. The large ones always caught my eye. Mortgage payment, groceries, utility bills, all expected. And then the outlier. The name of the boutique. The date. The amount. It didn't fit. It was a jagged, foreign shard slicing through the familiar list. My initial thought wasn't infidelity. It was confusion. A mistake? Identity theft? My mind scrambled for any explanation other than the one that was starting to form, cold and sharp, in the pit of my stomach. I picked up the phone, fingers fumbling slightly, and dialed the credit card company. The automated voice was calm, maddeningly unhelpful. I navigated the menus, finally reaching a human. I remember her voice, polite, detached. I asked about the specific charge. She confirmed the amount, the date, the vendor. I asked if she could provide any more details about the purchase. The line went silent for a moment. Then she said, "It appears to be jewelry, ma'am." Luxury items, the word luxury felt like a punch. Who was receiving luxury jewelry purchased on my credit line? Who was receiving gifts of any kind that cost this much? My voice was barely a whisper as I thanked her and hung up. The kitchen, moments before warm and bright, now felt like an interrogation room. The silence was deafening. My first attempts to process this were a chaotic storm of denial and fear. I looked at the statement again, tracing the numbers as if they might change their meaning. Maybe it was a business expense? Something he bought for a client? But luxury jewelry? It didn't track with his industry, not at all. I pulled up the online statement, hoping to find more detail there, a shipping address perhaps, a name. Nothing. Just the same stark transaction. The fear started to creep in, cold and insistent. What if it was fraud? What if someone had stolen my card information? But the date gnawed at me. The conference weekend. He had been evasive about that trip, I recalled now. Small details I had brushed off. Why hadn't he called much? Why had his text been brief, delayed? My brain, desperate to protect me, tried to construct alternative realities. He was planning a surprise? An anniversary gift, early? For me? But the boutique wasn't his style. The amount felt excessive even for that. And why use that card, the one we mostly used for household expenses, not the joint account he typically used for larger purchases? The question circled, relentless, each one chipping away at the fragile structure of my denial. I felt a growing nausea, a physical manifestation of the dread. I couldn't eat. Sleep offered no escape, only a few hours of tossing and turning, the transaction details flashing behind my eyelids. I started checking other accounts, looking for anything else unusual. Nothing so blatant, but small withdrawals I didn't recognize, transfers I couldn't account for. He started working later, coming home exhausted, withdrawn. He blamed stress at work. I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. I told myself I was being paranoid, jumping to conclusions. But the image of that purchase, those luxury items bought with my money during his conference, was a constant, aching presence in my mind. The house that had felt safe now felt foreign, filled with unspoken secrets. Every shared glance felt like a lie. Every touch felt like a violation. I was living in a performance where both actors knew the script was fake, but refused to stop playing their parts. The truth, relentless and cruel, eventually clawed its way out of the shadows. I found a crumpled receipt in his briefcase, tucked deep inside a zippered compartment, almost as if he'd tried to hide it. It was from the same boutique, dated the same day, and listed on it, line by line, were pieces of jewelry.
A diamond pendant, engraved.
A bracelet. Something expensive and glittering. My hands shook as I held it, the flimsy paper feeling heavier than stone.
Engraved. For whom?
Not for me. My stomach dropped. The name of the person the engraving was for wasn't on the receipt, of course. But finding it confirmed everything I had been trying not to know. I confronted him that night. He was tired, sipping a glass of wine, watching TV. I just held out the receipt, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, because any emotion would have shattered me completely. "What is this?" I asked. He looked at the receipt, then at me, his eyes widening just slightly. Just enough. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Then it snapped back into place. He crumpled the receipt in his hand.
"It's
nothing," he mumbled. A gift for a client. The lie was clumsy, desperate. A 5-figure diamond pendant for a client. I pushed, my voice rising despite myself. "On my credit line? During your conference?" His face hardened. The cornered animal look. "Why are you going through my things?" he snapped back, deflecting. Gaslighting. The word whispered in my mind. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. This was a choice. The argument escalated quickly. turning ugly. He accused me of not trusting him, of being controlling, of making something out of nothing. He yelled. He paced. He became a stranger in front of my eyes. He finally admitted, not to the affair, not yet, but to using the card, justifying it as a business expense he would reimburse later. A lie built on another lie. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by waves of betrayal, anger, and profound sadness. The financial reality was also starting to bite. The balance on the credit line was now maxed out, incurring exorbitant interest. The small withdrawals I'd noticed on other accounts? They were covering the minimum payments, just barely, leaving us short elsewhere. Late notices started arriving for other bills. The house that had been our sanctuary now felt like a cage, trapping me with a man I no longer knew, suffocating me under a mountain of debt he had created, not for us, but for someone else. The physical symptoms intensified, the constant knot in my stomach, the headaches, the overwhelming fatigue. I felt fragile, vulnerable, exposed. Every day was a performance of normality, masking the screaming chaos inside my head. The lowest point felt like hitting bedrock. He stopped coming home some nights. His excuses became thinner, more contemptible. The financial situation spiraled. The credit line was one thing, but it turned out he had been using funds from our joint savings, money earmarked for our future, for this other life. I discovered a pattern of cash withdrawals, large ones, during weekends he was supposedly traveling for work. He started intercepting the mail, becoming paranoid about what I might find. The air in the house was thick with tension, a constant, suffocating weight. I felt utterly alone. My small business, which required focus and energy, suffered. I couldn't concentrate, my mind consumed by the betrayal and the mounting crisis. Fear was a constant companion. Fear of the future, fear of being left with nothing, fear of the man I shared my home with. I remember one night, sitting in the dark living room after he'd gone to bed, the silence amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. Tears streamed down my face, silent and endless. I felt stripped bare, humiliated, my 19 years of commitment and love reduced to a punchline, paid for with my own money. The thought of leaving felt impossible. Where would I go? How would I support myself? How would I untangle the financial mess? He had intertwined our lives so completely, it felt like cutting off a limb to break free. Every path I considered seemed blocked, leading only to more pain and uncertainty. I felt trapped in a labyrinth of his making, with no map and no exit. All the strength I thought I possessed had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. The world outside felt distant, unreal. My entire existence had shrunk to the four walls of this house, this prison of my own broken marriage. It felt like there was no hope left, only a slow, inevitable descent into ruin. One morning, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, gaunt and hollow-eyed, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like a slow crystallization of cold anger and a desperate need for survival. I looked at myself and saw not a victim, but someone who had allowed herself to be systematically dismantled. The helplessness I felt wasn't a natural state. It was a cage I had let him build around me, reinforced by my own fear. The image of his face, contorted in anger and deceit during our arguments, flashed in my mind. The casual cruelty of using my credit line, my name, to fund his infidelity. It wasn't just about the money or the affair anymore. It was about his utter contempt, his belief that he could walk over me, take from me, and face no consequences. In that moment, the tears stopped. A cold resolve set in. I wasn't going to be the one left broken and penniless. I wasn't going to let him win. I didn't know exactly how yet, but the feeling was absolute. I would not be the casualty of his recklessness and betrayal. This wasn't just about getting a divorce. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and ensuring he faced the repercussions of his actions, not just the consequences he might expect, but consequences that struck at the core of his perceived invincibility. The fear didn't vanish, but it was now overshadowed by a steely determination. I started doing things differently. I stopped confronting him directly. I started listening more, observing. I started gathering information discreetly. I researched legal options, focusing not just on divorce, but on the fraudulent use of my credit line. I learned about the legal implications of using someone else's credit without permission, even a spouse's, especially when the funds are not for marital purposes. And then I started reading about the recipient of fraudulently obtained goods. The phrase, receiving stolen property, lodged itself in my mind. Could that apply? The luxury jewelry, it wasn't a gift from him, not legally. It was purchased with funds stolen, in effect, from me. The wheels began to turn. A risky idea, a long shot, maybe, but it offered a path, a way to strike back in a way he would never anticipate. It wasn't just about the money anymore.
It was about justice.
About turning his weapon against him. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. Legal expertise. Someone who understood this specific angle. The turning point wasn't about revenge, not purely. It was about survival, yes, but also about demonstrating that actions have consequences, particularly when those actions involve using and discarding another person. My strategy began to form, cold and precise, like a surgeon's plan. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path I saw that didn't lead to my own destruction. I needed proof, not just of the purchases, but of the recipient. I needed to connect the luxury jewelry bought with my credit line to his mistress. Her name, which I had found buried in his phone records, was like a toxic brand seared into my consciousness. He'd given her a unique, expensive gift engraved. That was my starting point. Proving she received it, and ideally proving it was the specific item bought with my card, became my obsession. I hired a private investigator, explaining only the fraudulent use of my credit line for expensive gifts. I didn't mention the affair directly at first. I wanted the investigation to focus purely on the financial trail and the recipient of the goods. It cost money I barely had, draining what little emergency fund remained in my name, but it felt like an investment in my future. The investigator was efficient, discreet. He confirmed the recipient's identity, a woman named Clara. He provided an address. And, through careful surveillance and a touch of technological savvy I didn't ask too many questions about, he managed to obtain photographic evidence. Photographs of Clara, wearing a distinctive diamond pendant. A pendant that looked exactly like the one described on the receipt from the luxury boutique. The engraving was difficult to see clearly in the photos, but the style, the cut of the stone, everything matched. It was circumstantial, yes, but powerful. Paired with the credit card statement and the receipt, it created a compelling picture. I took all of this, the credit card statements, the receipt, the investigator's report, the photographs, and I went to a lawyer recommended by a friend. Not a divorce lawyer, not at first. I went to a lawyer specializing in financial fraud and white-collar crime. I laid it all out, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then, she leaned forward. "This isn't just marital infidelity and debt," she said, her voice low. "This is potential fraud. Theft of services, essentially, using your credit line without your full knowledge or consent for non-marital purposes. And the recipient." She paused, tapping a finger on the investigator's report. If she knew, or should have known, the property was acquired under questionable circumstances that could potentially be receiving stolen property, my heart leaped. This was it. This was the angle. It shifted the focus from a messy divorce to a potential criminal matter, one that involved the mistress directly. The lawyer explained the steps. We would file a police report, detailing the fraudulent use of the credit line. We would provide the evidence linking the purchase to Clara and the jewelry. The police would investigate. If they found probable cause, particularly if Clara was found in possession of the jewelry and couldn't provide a legitimate explanation for how she acquired such expensive items, charges could be filed. This wasn't a guarantee. It was complex, but it was a pathway. A way to disrupt his carefully constructed world, not by confronting him directly about the affair, but by attacking the consequence of his actions, the gift he had given, the lie it represented, and the person he had given it to. The deepening crisis had cornered me. This plan felt like turning that corner into a weapon. Executing the plan felt like moving in a slow-motion dream. Every step was deliberate, terrifying. I filed the police report, detailing the credit card fraud. I provided the statements, the receipt, the investigators' findings, the photographs of Clara wearing the pendant. I answered their questions calmly, sticking strictly to the financial fraud, the unauthorized use of my credit, and the tracing of the expensive items purchased with it. I didn't dwell on the affair. It was irrelevant to the crime of fraud. The police were professional, detached. They listened, they took notes, they impounded the evidence. They explained a process. They would investigate, follow the leads. It could take time. The waiting was agonizing. Every day felt like an eternity. I continued living in the house with him, a ghost moving through rooms haunted by betrayal. I kept up the facade of distant civility. He seemed oblivious, perhaps thinking I had accepted the situation, resigned myself to the debt. He was careless. He thought he was safe. He had no idea the ground was shifting beneath his feet. The call from the detective came 3 weeks later. My lawyer was on the line with me. The detective informed us they had followed up. They had located Clara. They had questioned her about the jewelry. She was, he said, unable to provide a satisfactory explanation for how she came into possession of such high-value items. There were discrepancies in her story. Based on the evidence I had provided, the clear paper trail from my credit line to the purchase, the investigators' tracing of the item to her possession, and her inability to credibly explain receiving it, they had sufficient probable cause. Clara had been arrested on suspicion of receiving stolen property. The detective's voice was calm, procedural. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I thanked him, hung up the phone. My lawyer's voice was quiet on the line. They got her, she said simply. The relief was a physical wave, making my knees weak. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the first crucial phase of the plan had worked. Then came the climax, the moment of perfect, icy vindication. It didn't happen in a courtroom or in a dramatic confession scene. It happened in our living room on a Tuesday evening, quiet like the one where I'd first found the statement. He came home late, looking stressed, but not unusually so. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie. I was sitting on the sofa, ostensibly reading. My phone rang. It was his mother. This was unusual. She rarely called me directly, preferring to go through him. I answered. Her voice was panicked, bordering on hysterical. "Have you heard from him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He just called. He's frantic." "Something about Clara. Arrested? For stolen jewelry? What is going on?" The words tumbled out, a torrent of fear and confusion. His head snapped up at the sound of Clara's name. He froze, glass halfway to his lips, his eyes fixed on me. He heard his mother mention the arrest, the stolen jewelry. His face, moments before weary, contorted in disbelief. The blood drained from it, leaving it pasty and shocked. He didn't understand. How could she be arrested? For stolen property. The jewelry was a gift. He thought he was safe, his tracks covered, his mistress untouchable within the confines of his lie. He didn't know about the police report I filed, about the fraud investigation I initiated using my stolen credit line as the central crime. He didn't know I had traced the specific purchase, hired an investigator, provided proof that the jewelry he gave her was, in the eyes of the law looking at my complaint, potentially purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. He thought I was focused on the affair, on the debt, on the marital drama. He never imagined I would target the consequence, the physical manifestation of his betrayal, and use the legal system to connect her to his crime, a crime committed against me. He slammed his glass down on the coffee table. "What did she say?" he demanded, his voice hoarse, eyes wide with panic. "What did my mother say?" He wasn't looking at me with anger anymore, but with pure, unadulterated shock and fear. The tables hadn't just turned. They had been flipped over with brutal force, burying him underneath. He grabbed his phone, fumbling with it, trying to call someone. His lawyer, maybe? Clara? He paced the room, a caged animal, his movements jerky, panicked. She was arrested, he repeated, his voice rising, disbelieving.
How? Why?
It was a gift. His screams echoed in the quiet house, screams of a man completely blindsided, his secret life collapsing publicly, spectacularly, in the most unexpected way. He wasn't screaming at me, not really. He was screaming at the unfairness of it, at the world that had dared to disrupt his carefully managed deception. His mistress, the symbol of his freedom and escape, was facing criminal charges directly linked to his actions against me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His actions had consequences he never anticipated, and I was the architect of his downfall. The cold satisfaction that settled in my gut was profound, quiet, and absolute. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. His face, a mask of shattered disbelief, said everything. The aftermath was a strange mix of chaos and quiet. His panic continued for days. He was scrambling, trying to understand the charges against Clara, trying to pull strings he thought he had. He hired a lawyer for her, another one for himself. The police wanted to question him about the fraudulent use of my credit line. The investigation into the financial fraud, initiated by me, was now impacting him directly. He faced potential legal repercussions for the unauthorized use of my accounts, separate from any divorce proceedings. Our home became a battlefield of legal documents, hushed, frantic phone calls, and his increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. It was too late. The system, slow and impersonal, was now moving, set in motion by my deliberate action. I filed for divorce the next week. The grounds were simple, irreconcilable differences, though the underlying financial fraud and his actions would be detailed in the financial disclosures. I didn't ask for punitive damages related to the affair, not in court. The universe, or perhaps just the cold mechanics of the legal system I had leveraged, had already delivered a form of justice far more impactful than any court settlement. Clara's case moved forward. The details are complex and private, but the fact remained. She was arrested and faced charges for receiving property that the prosecution argued was acquired through financial fraud originating from my account. The scandal, contained within our immediate circle and the legal system, was devastating to his reputation. His family was horrified, his colleagues distant. He had used my name, my credit, to build his fantasy, and that very act had become the instrument of its destruction. For me, the immediate feeling wasn't elation, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The constant tension of the past months, the fear, the planning, the waiting, finally dissipated, leaving behind an aching emptiness. I had won, in a way, reclaiming my financial stability and ensuring consequences for his betrayal. But the cost was immense. 19 years of my life, reduced to this cold, calculated dismantling. The house felt empty now, stripped of its former comfort, filled only with the echoes of his panic and my own quiet grief. I started the slow process of rebuilding, securing my finances, finding a smaller place to live, reconnecting with friends I had distanced myself from. There was no triumphant fanfare, just the quiet, steady work of piecing a life back together. I learned that sometimes the most powerful defense is a cold, intelligent offense. That betrayal can be a weapon, but the truth, delivered strategically, can be far more devastating. The bitterness lingers, a phantom taste in my mouth, but beneath it, a fragile sense of freedom is starting to bloom. I am scarred, yes, but I am not broken. I survived. And in the most unexpected, satisfying way, I prevailed. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.